Hello everyone and welcome to the Summer Sustainability Summit brought to you by One Click LCA. My name is Kim and I'll be happy to be your host for this session. This is a 2-day free online event for architecture, engineering, construction, manufacturing, and sustainability professionals across the construction value chain. We're delighted to have you here to get inspired, get engaged, and get sustainable. The summit is brought to you by One Click LCA, the global LCA software empowering the industry to decarbonize and get sustainable. With One Click LCA, you can comply with more than 80 national standards and access the world's largest construction LCA database. For over 20 years, One Click LCA has been making the construction value chain sustainable, and you can learn more about us at oneclicklca.com. Now, let's start our session. I'm very excited to be joined by Marios Tsikos, LCA Consulting and Training Lead at One Click LCA.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Marios. Irene Garcia, Built Environment Lead at Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, CNCA.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Irene. Adam Wadsten, Environmental Strategist and Project Manager at City of Lund from Sweden.
Hello.
Welcome, Adam. Tanja Tyvimaa, Senior Specialist with a focus on carbon neutrality and circular economy in construction at City of Tampere from Finland.
Hello.
Welcome, Tanja. And finally, Wim de Jager, Head of Lille Metropole EU Office at City of Lille from France. Welcome, Wim.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you.
What a lineup of speakers in this session. Today, we're going to discuss how cities can give buildings a second life and talk about the different factors when considering demolishing or refurbishing existing buildings. We will also share the key findings of a report we've conducted together with CNCA and have a discussion around the policy outline of the report with all of our speakers. Now, to kick things off, we have Irene from Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance to give us an intro to this subject and set the scene for our upcoming discussion. Irene, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. I'm Irene Garcia, Environment Lead of Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, or CNCA, as we usually go by. We are an alliance of cities which have committed to cut emissions by 80 to 100% in the next 10 or 20 years. And we support them achieve transformative action to help them meet those goals. Next slide, please. You can see the list of cities listed below. Next slide, please. And we support them through peer-to-peer learning, policy development support, innovation, as well as communication and engagement training to shape the narrative towards transformative climate actions. We typically work with the climate directors and in areas that they identify as the priority to help them reduce emission big times. And the built environment, obviously, is one of those areas. As you can see in the next slide, the built environment worldwide is responsible for 40% of energy-related CO2 emissions, 50% of all the extracted materials, 33% of water consumption, and 35% of the generated waste. In addition, in Europe, most of the countries are dealing with the lack of availability and affordability of housing and an aged building stock, which is not resilient and future-proof. So we need to make sure that the renovation is not equal to demolition to achieve the rates that we need to achieve at large scale. And also, we cannot continue to build as the option because we don't have the enough carbon budget if we are serious about meeting the 1.5 degrees of the Paris Agreement. To give you an example, the city of Amsterdam, if we're considering all the indirect emissions from materials and construction associated, they ran out of their carbon budget in 2023. Next slide, please. For this reason, because we really need to transform the construction sector, we hasn't been quite challenged yet, and we need to change the whole business industry surrounding it. One Click LCA, CNCA, and Architecture 2030 developed a city policy framework, which we published in 2020. It was listing 52 policies that cities can put in place based on their different legal framework, and to reduce embodied carbon, and they can explore based on the cost efficiency how easy it is to inform, to implement. And I invite you to go to that link to see which policies make more impact and more sense in your context depending on the policy mandate. Next slide. And where you can see is we develop, in addition to this, the embodied carbon reduction measure typology, and here listed it goes the measures that has a larger impact to the lesser impact. And what is clear is that it's not enough to decarbonize the environment by only selecting low carbon materials. Indeed, the first thing that we all need to be doing is to question the need for construction. It might be that, first of all, you don't need to construct, and you need to redefine the solution by others mean that construction. For instance, if you need to develop a service, you can make use of the underused space of school, or mapping out what is your vacant land and how you can repurpose and reuse that for different uses. And here in this webinar, we will explore through the extraordinary examples of Lund, Tampere, and Lille, how the cities are approaching this embodied carbon reduction pyramid and all the different policies to give buildings a second life and to reuse material. Next. So in order to support them to put in place that framework, we launched in 2021 with the support of the Loudest Foundation and Build by Nature, a project, and we're in partnership with One Click LCA. We map out the different competencies of cities in zoning and land use, waste and circularity, public procurement, buildings and regulations, and identify the actionable pathways of different European cities, a total of 12. If we zoom out in terms of renovation and refurbishment and how to prioritize and reduce the use of materials, what we see in the next slide is that for municipal buildings, the top priority policy that was recommended to all of them, and that was their priority was the establishing a comparison between renovation versus demolition and new construction as an interlinked policy. In case that the demolition needs to happen, the recommendations was to establish mandatory pre-demolition audit and data sharing to facilitate companies to have an understanding of the materials that can be available, it can be reused, as well as mandatory material take-back program. Next, please. And because we realized that there is a lot of methodology coming up and guides to help cities and help governments reduce the embodied carbon from new construction, because the upfront embodied carbon is the highest one across the whole life cycle. But it is often underlooked the benefits of the embodied carbon reduction potential for refurbishment, especially if we are, which we need to be doing, questioning the need for construction. This is why, in partnership with One Click LCA, we developed this policy outline to help cities and to help all the stakeholders along the construction value chain to assess the benefits of renovation versus demolition and new construction, and methodology for assessing whole life cycle carbon assessment and costs, including the energy they reuse and repair. And I'll give the floor to Mario Sikas to give you a better explanation about this policy outline. But for any information, please feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to be talking to all of you. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Irene, for setting the scene for our topic today. And like Irene said, next up, we will dive into our key report findings and the policy outline with Marios. So Marios, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Kim. The policy outline we're suggesting is based on a comparison of a refurbishment option with a new build option from a whole life carbon point of view. This means that we are expecting the developer to undertake a life cycle assessment for at least these two options and decide which one to go with on the grounds of whole life carbon emissions. But why do we suggest LCA as a way to compare these different options? This is because LCA is a reliable and repeatable methodology which allows us to do a fair and objective comparison between design options. That can happen with any design option, not just refurbishment versus new build. It is focusing on global warming potential, which is the whole life carbon emissions, as we call it. It takes into account both the embodied carbon and the operational carbon emissions, and it also allows us for doing life cycle cost calculations and circularity assessments at the same time. Before we go further into the details, let's give a brief definition of LCA first. So, LCA is a standardized methodology that allows us to calculate the environmental impacts of our product or building in this case throughout its entire life cycle. So for buildings, this life cycle starts with the raw materials extraction at module A1, as we can see at the top left of this slide. So emissions related to extracting, for example, limestone, iron ore, clay, and other raw materials. We've got the transportation impacts of those materials to the factories, the actual manufacturing process, so turning limestone into cement and iron ore into steel, and so on. Transportation of these construction products now, like cement, concrete, and steel, from the factories to the construction site, the construction process itself, the use stage, which has material related impacts, but also energy and water related impacts. So, the energy and water that we as building occupants consume during the building's life cycle. We've got then the end of life stage with deconstruction of the building, then transportation of these deconstruction products from the site to the various recycling facilities or the landfills, emissions from recycling processes like turning steel scrap into steel, recycled steel, or emissions happening at the landfill. Like if we dispose any organic materials, they will start to decompose and emit methane and other greenhouse gases. And at the very end, we've got what we call Module D, which is the benefits and loads beyond the system boundary, which take into account benefits from recycling or reusing some of those materials, or even incinerating some of those materials and recovering the energy out of this process. So if we focus on carbon emissions only, then this LCA is also called a whole life carbon assessment, which is split into two main types of emissions, the embodied carbon and the operational carbon, as we said. And the fact that we can assess both these types of emissions is the reason why we suggest LCA for comparing the two options, the refurbishment and the new build, because a new energy efficient building will come with increased embodied carbon or upfront carbon, as Irene mentioned just earlier, and the refurbished building will be lower embodied carbon or low embodied carbon, but it might not achieve the same operational carbon reductions. Moving on to the proposed policy now, we're proposing that such a policy would include the following key requirements for all sites where there is an existing building. So first we start with a refurbishment feasibility study, as we call it, feasibility study of the existing buildings and structures in order to find out if this existing building can be refurbished, how and for how long. Once the refurbishment is confirmed as an option, then the policy requires that a comparative LCA is undertaken for these two options, with the results being submitted to the city. Depending on the final criteria that would allow the demolition of the existing building, if the comparison concludes to demolition, then this must be approved by the city through a demolition application and, of course, justification as well. Going into more detail now for the proposed feasibility study. At this stage, the developer must commission a site survey before any design work starts in order to identify if the existing structure can be reused and at what extent. this survey should identify any damage and deficiencies in the existing structure. It should assess the remaining service life of the structure and suggest the remediation works required in order to achieve a minimum of 50 years, as we propose, of extension for the service life of the building. The survey must also suggest that refurbishment is not a valid option on the grounds of technical challenges, health and safety risks, or significantly increased remediation costs. So, if anything like that is the case, then of course we should not be doing any refurbishment work. Then a pre-demolition audit will be needed in order to identify the elements and the materials that can be reused in the new building. And this survey must be undertaken, of course, by a third party, and any survey that concludes the demolition must be reviewed by the city before the demolition permit is granted. So there are a few possible outcomes after the feasibility studies, and here we can see a few examples of what these could be. In this first example, the existing concrete structure is fit for reuse. This is the outcome of the survey, and it has at least 50 years of remaining service life. This means that the refurbishment is a valid option and must be compared with a new build option as part of the planning process. In the second example, there is an existing steel structure, let's say, that requires some elements to be replaced and some strengthening in order to expand the service life for another 50 years. And these interventions are described and must be taken into account in the refurbishment option assessment when we compare it with a new build. In this third example, the existing structure has been heavily deformed due to ground movements, and hence it cannot be reused. The only thing that can be done in this case to preserve some value in the existing material is to do a pre-demolition audit and identify what elements and materials can be removed and reused later in the new building. In this last example, there is an existing building that, although it can be reused as is, it cannot support vertical expansion in order to maximize the site's potential. So the survey will highlight which elements need strengthening and whether this is feasible at all. Strengthening activities will need to be taken into account in the refurbishment assessment when we compare it with a new build. So once the feasibility study has concluded that refurbishment is a valid option, then the developer must include at least one refurbishment option in their comparison. The assessment must be a whole life assessment, including all stages and all modules, and must report the results in kilos of CO2 equivalent per occupant in the case of residential buildings, or kilos of CO2 equivalent per square meter of net internal area for all other buildings. The service life must be set to 50 years for all options to allow a simple and consistent comparison. So this is why we were including the 50 years extension of the service life in the feasibility study. The option with the lowest global warming potential or whole life carbon emissions is going to be the preferable one, with some exceptions, which could be, for example, include it could include one of the options shown in this slide. These could be that the new building contributes to densification of the neighborhood, which happens to be in a high transportation index or public transportation zone, as we could call it. It could be that it happens in a very small site. Very small could be a definition provided by the city every time, because it can be different for different countries and different regions. It could be excluded based on the owner's financial status, so we don't want everyone to pay the same when it comes to the transition to net zero. And it could be on the grounds of LC costs or construction costs being much higher. So to summarize, with this proposed policy, cities would try to minimize the demolition of existing buildings and hence reduce the carbon emissions associated with new buildings. Based on this policy, demolition should only be allowed if the existing structure cannot be refurbished, if the new build has lower global warming potential, if refurbishment cannot achieve the maximum expansion, which would be desired in a public transport zone, if the LCC or construction cost is prohibiting, and also based on various socioeconomic criteria set by the city. And I believe with that, I will hand it over back to Kim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marius, for a great overview of our key report findings and the policy outline. Super insightful. You can actually also find a link to the report and policy framework in the chat, and you'll be able to access the full content of this entire report through that link. Next up, we will give the stage to our city representatives, and they will give their take on the topic of refurbishment and demolition based on their own experiences working with this topic with their respective cities. And first up, we have Adam and City of Lund. Adam, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes, I had a little bit of a scare here. We had a fire alarm in the building, so I had to run over to the next one. Well, anyways, we're a small city in the southern part of Sweden, and with 130,000 inhabitants. We had a newly adopted plan for climate neutral building and construction, and our inclusion in the CNCA earlier project was a focus on creating a routine to handle reuse inventories, which we had a law in Sweden, but we didn't really do it in a systematic way. So we had a national legislations, but nobody really understood what it meant and how to handle it. You can change to the next slide, please. Well, the routine covers maintenance, renovation, and demolition of buildings. It's a framework for our managers and project managers and property managers to get a systematically way of doing those reuse inventories. And also it includes how to prepare the knowledge gathering, so we know how the building looks and what we're supposed to do inventory of. And we have also like different levels of inventories depending on the type of building and also in the time. We do like a simple inventory in the beginning, and if we find it's interesting, we do a more deep dive. And also we have also include action and planning and monitoring what we're going to do with the materials after. But that's also a key point for us to work with more. So it's what needs to be done, who does it, when what is needed for the project managers to have a systematic way to handle it. Yes, you can change. Next slide, please. Yeah, that was too fast. Sorry. So our plan, who is like driving this routine, is that we have a political goal of 50% reduction in CO2 from all the new builds and renovations from 2025, which is pretty tough. And the climate neutral, we don't really know exactly what that means, from 2030. So reuse here will be the key to reaching those goals, I think, in a large way. And we also have a new logistics center and storage, and with mediating services opening now after this summer. It's actually private sector driven, but it's been like facilitated by us. So it's also opening for the municipality, but also for private actors. Yes, you can change to the next. So what we're doing next is we have a very good digital platform that is when we do the reuse inventories, we put all the materials in different projects in this platform, and we can keep it for ourselves, or we can sell it, or we can share the project and the information. And you can list a lot of information there, and it's also calculated the CO2 winnings of not being necessarily buying new material. And we also have to do a more detailed framework for how to actually involve the materials in the new projects, but that's the next step. Yes, you can take the next slide. So what we're doing in our next CNCA project, we'll be looking at the different types of renovation or remodeling actions, identifying them either by the size, like total renovations, or if you have like bathroom renovations that are maybe not so big if you look at one renovation, but you do a lot. So we will pick and choose maybe 6 to 10 different type of renovation actions and look at them in a more cost and carbon cost way, and to be able to compare them. We wish to develop or redevelop a tool that has been started here in Sweden, so we can use it like in an Excel manner, so we can put in different type of actions and look at them both in a cost and carbon cost way. But we also need those social aspects, and that's where the cost part come in, because if you can probably do a lot of carbon reduction, but usually it comes also with a cost. So we try to limit those costs and not to push inhabitants out of their apartments, for example. Yes. I think that was probably me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Very interesting and concrete examples from Lund, and we'll have some follow-up questions coming your way a bit later in this session. Next, we will give the floor to City of Tampere and Dr. Tanja Tyvimaa. Tanja, please go ahead.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm going to tell you about Tammela School's circular economy case. So as a summary, this is a school complex close by the city center. The site has 3 buildings. Building 1 is from 1911 and will be renovated. Building 2 is from 1957, and the building will be partly demolished and rebuilt and partly renovated. This presentation is focusing on this building 2. We implement circular economy in new building when we are going to build it. And building 3 is temporary and will be removed after the project is completed. Three different scenarios were studied for the building 2. Full refurbishment scenario, completely new building scenario, and partly refurbished, partly new construction. And this is the option what we selected. All those scenarios compared and assessed together. We did nearly 20 different assessments during this analysis. Those assessments included, for example, LCA, LCC, technical condition of all structures, historical value, indoor climate, and environmental assessments. So building 2 has significant indoor climate problems. So it has been already closed for years. So full refurbishment is not really an option within this building. Based on all those assessments, it was decided to renovate the health part of the building and then demolish and rebuild this part of the building where we had those most significant problems. And the application for demolition is mandatory in this case. As part of all assessments, we calculated carbon footprint to all scenarios. You can see all numbers in the table. The total GWP is the most important number here. Those different scenarios have different square meters, so we can't really compare carbon footprint per square meter in this case at all. But you can see that total carbon footprint between different scenarios is not significantly different. And then investment costs and life cycle costs for 50 years. The option what we selected is green one in the middle, and you can also see that full refurbishment would have been the most expensive option in both of those cost calculations. As we need to demolish part of the building 2, we decided to implement circular economy principles. So we reuse materials and parts from the building 2 in the new building 2 as much as possible. So I have listed some materials and parts here, so you can see that we plan to reuse doors, windows, bricks, and maybe also old staircases and so on. If we can't use some of those parts at this project, we have other school buildings where we can use them, and then the very last option is that we are going to sell those parts. And of course, all reused materials must be approved by local authorities. So as the final words, we can't always save all our buildings and we can't renovate all of them, but we can always implement circular economy. So I believe that in this case, we found the best possible scenario, how we can maximize renovation, reuse materials, and we can also get a new health school building. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanja, for another great example from City of Tampere. And you'll have some questions coming up later as well. For our final city presentation, we will welcome Wim de Jager to the stage to give us some more info on the subject from City of Lille's perspective. So Wim, please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the floor. So Wim de Jager, I work for the permanent representation of Lille Metropole to the European institutions in Brussels. So Lille Metropole is located in the north of France, so close to the Belgian border. We are a structure for intermunicipal metropolitan cooperation. We are the fourth French metropole after Paris, Marseille, Lyon, and we gather 95 municipalities for 1.2 million inhabitants. Today I will talk you briefly about our project Blanche Maille, located in Roubaix, one of the 95 municipalities of our metropolis. So Roubaix is a city of about 100,000 inhabitants. It's the third biggest municipality of our metropolitan area after the city of Lille and the city of Tourcoing. So the site that we call Blanche Maille is a main urban renovation project for our metropolis. It is about the refurbishment of one of the 3 buildings from the former headquarters from La Redoute, a mail order service company that stopped his activities on this site in 2017. And Lille Metropole bought this site in 2019 in order to create a cluster dedicated to e-commerce. So the aim is to create a totem site, including the development of 13,000 square meters of tertiary floor space to accommodate incubation and accelerate the creation of startups and to host companies. The program also includes a business hotel, event space, and logistics spaces. So from the beginning, the objective was to develop an ambitious renovation project with high standards on environment quality, low emission, and low energy consumption. So the project is certified HQI, high environment quality. The French label HQI is the equivalent of BREEAM, so Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment label. So in the framework of HQI, we received the excellent level on the conception part, and the challenge is now to maintain this excellence level for the construction phase of the project. The project also respects a local pact on wood, so the aim is to use at least 30% of wood coming from France or from a perimeter of 150 kilometers, as we're located close to the Belgian border. So we have other labels like Osmos, a label about the quality of life, and the other main starting point of the project was the commitment to develop a circular economy project with a maximum reuse of materials. Furthermore, it's also interesting to mention that we use the building information modeling, the BIM, for the development of the project. So we use the BIM for technical and environmental simulations, but also for the development of tools to optimize circular economy strategy. On this slide, you see the master plan of the project, so designed by the Studio Autier Architects, the winning team of the architectural competition. So the project site is located in an urban renovation area dealing with some problems like a rather high unemployment rate, poverty. So therefore, the renovation of the building plays also an important role in the renovation of the neighborhood. On top, at the right side of the master plan, you see that the old private parking space of the company La Redoute will be transformed in green public space to create a cool spot and a green area in the neighborhood. You see that also on the perspective of the building on the right side. So now we'll talk a bit more in detail about the reuse part of the materials. So we reused as maximum as possible, and also different types of materials like the partitions of the old office spaces, ceilings, external joinery, sanitary facilities, but also tiles, parquet flooring, doors, cable rails, etc. We were able to benefit from optimal conditions for use because the reused materials could be stored temporarily in a building right next door. So this saved us transport and storage costs. So you see several pictures on the reused materials on this and the storage on site. On the next slide, you can see a plan showing all the materials reused. As you can see, we reused almost everything that was possible, like also radiators, lighting, installation, doors, carpets, wash basins, toilets, balustrades, etc. It's also important to mention that in addition to reusing materials in situ, we also gave associations and members of the reuse sector the opportunity to come and recover materials that we didn't need for reuse. So the environmental performance you see on the slide is the result of a material recovery weekend that we organized. So 2.5 tons of materials were recovered by associations, which corresponds to more than 19,000 kilo of CO2 emissions avoided. The global environmental benefit of the reuse of materials on the scale of the project is much higher, of course. So we estimate that about 400 tons of CO2 emissions are avoided thanks to the reuse aspects of the project. So when I say the global environmental benefits, it's the addition of the reuse of materials in situ on the one hand, and the materials that we gave to associations also for reuse on the other hand. As last slide about the use of BIM, as I already mentioned, we use BIM through the whole project process. So BIM helps us to evaluate and classify materials for reuse. So thanks to BIM, we created a global virtual materials library. So we have a precise view of the stock of materials and where it's stored for the use. And we also won the BIM Silver Prize in the category renovation projects between 5,000 and 30,000 square meters. So yeah, just a short overview of this concrete project that we realize in our metropolitan area, especially on the reuse of materials.
Super. Thank you, Wim, for a great presentation overview from City of Lille's perspective. Now, to recap a little bit, Irene has set the scene for the topic. Marios has given us our key report findings and the policy outline, and all the cities have shared their own experiences from refurbishment and demolition. It is time for some discussion, and I would love to kick things off with the first question to Adam from Lund. So, Adam, do you think this or a version of this suggested refurbishment policy can be implemented in your city of Lund?
Yes, I think probably we can do it primarily internally, because here in Sweden we have very strong national legislation and very weak municipal possibilities. So implementing it for private actors in the city municipal borders, it's probably not possible. Perhaps in a way, but not as strong as the policy outline is written, I think.
Yeah. How about Wim? The same question to you as well. Do you think this can be implemented in Lille?
Yeah, so renovation is a very important aspect in our metropolitan area as well for private and public housing, but also for the renovation of brownfields, industrial sites, as we have a strong industrial heritage. So this is strongly embedded in our climate plan, and this joins also the recommendations of One Click LCA when we work together in the framework of the dramatically reducing embodied carbon project. So I think this project, Blanche Maille, show that it's possible. Of course, there are some challenges because, as I said, we had the opportunity to storage the reused materials in situ, but when this is not possible, then there are challenges about where can we do the storage. There was also some transport costs for the use of materials, and this can higher a lot the cost. So in this case, for Blanchemont, it was not the case because we had the opportunity to do it inside. But yeah, this is a little bit a challenge. How can we find a kind of business model if you have to storage elsewhere? You have also transport costs, and the total cost of the renovation can be higher. So this can be a challenge. How can we find also business models for that? But in any case, choosing renovation over demolition, extending the lifespan of building through eco-design, the adaptability of spaces, and the reversibility of uses is a very strong issue on our climate plan, and a very strong aspect that we want to develop further in the coming years.
Yeah, thanks, Wim. And actually, I think a good follow-up question that I would like to ask from Irene, speaking from CNCA's perspective. How do you think the industry would respond to this suggested policy?
I think the industry is under tremendous pressure at the moment to find more sustainable or circular solutions to the way we use materials and the processes associated to construction. And as we've seen from the different examples provided by the city representatives at Lille, Lund, and Tampere, when faced with the challenge the industry deliver, I think what is important is to make sure that we are including the right requirements and enforcing policies. We're seeing that happening at the city level, but we also see that from the EU level with incoming incentives and legislation, such as the Energy Performance Building Directive, the Construction Product Regulation, the EU Taxonomy, the Waste Framework Directive, you name it. And all those aim to prevent demolition waste and encourage circularity. I think the important part will be to make sure that we're paying attention to the process to establish the right collaboration among all the stakeholders to have a trust and honest conversation on what is needed and where they are at, but also to make sure that we are providing and developing the right methodologies and the open, accessible, and transparent data for everyone to be able to make the right decisions when it comes to assessing, when it comes to designing, and to deciding which solutions work best.
Yeah, thank you, Irene. Very, very interesting. Actually, for our last city representative, Tanya, speaking from Tampere/Finland perspective, do you think the real estate sector in Tampere/Finland is ready to make such a change?
Yeah, I actually believe that they are ready. We have had several different types of circular economy pilots here in Tampere, and the real estate sector and construction sector has been very positive and excited about circular economy. I think the challenge is some of those things what Irene already mentioned, that we need to think the whole development process again. We need to change the whole process. It's not enough that we just reuse old materials in new buildings, but we need to really change the thinking, how we design, how we plan our schedules during the process, and really change the whole process, and then I think that we can do it. So there are some challenges, but I believe that the industry is ready and they are willing to do the change.
Yeah, that is good to hear. And Marios, you touched a little bit on the socio-economic criteria in your slides, but how would you say what would be the socio-economic criteria for exclusion from this policy? Would there be some exceptions?
Yeah. Well, these would be defined by the cities because, they have to be different in different cities, different regions, and different countries. But what we meant by socioeconomic criteria is that we cannot expect everyone to chip in like the same towards decarbonization of the construction and the economy. So it cannot be a landowner of like 200 square meters. We cannot expect them to apply such a policy, at least not immediately. But we can do so for bigger developers who are going to be like thousands of square meters. That's going to be much easier for them, and it's going to have a much bigger impact. So it would be things like that, like the size of the plots or the financial status of the site owners, and these kind of things. And again, it depends on on the region and the country, really, because I mean, in some countries the plots are much smaller and the developments are much smaller. In some others they are huge, and so on.
Awesome. Thanks, Marius. And last follow-up question to you, Marius, before we move on. But do you think the industry has the right tools at the moment to comply with this policy?
The industry has many tools, One Click LCA being one of them. They can already be used for such comparisons, comparing refurbishment and new build. When this method becomes a policy or it is integrated into a policy, then of course these tools have to be adjusted to this policy. So in our report we are suggesting things that we, although we are One Click LCA, we're suggesting things that are not immediately implementable in One Click LCA. So software developers, they will have to adjust their tools to enable these kind of calculations, which is not difficult. I mean, it happens with all LCA methodologies that come up. Whenever we have a new methodology, then the LCA tools are being adjusted, or we create new ones in order to facilitate our users to do these kind of calculations. So yeah, we've got many tools. I'm pretty sure that this is not going to be the problem.
That's good to hear. Thank you, everyone, for the discussion and thoughts. I feel like we could easily spend another couple of hours discussing these topics, but before we actually started today's session, we agreed on the top 3 takeaways of this session with all the speakers. And if we can highlight the top 3 takeaways, I would ask our speakers to read these out loud and elaborate a bit on why these exact top 3 takeaways. Marius, perhaps you could start, and everyone else feel free to elaborate as well.
Sure, yeah. So number 1 is to prioritize refurbishment for lower carbon. So this is the main incentive why we did this report. It's the main incentive why we're doing this webinar, because we believe that refurbishment is going to result in significant carbon savings across the industry and across all regions. This is the number 1 thing that you need to think about. However, because if we integrate this into regulations and policies, we need to base this on numbers and calculations, and this is why we need a very concrete, let's say, methodology, and this is why we created this methodology or proposed this methodology. The second takeaway is to enforce policy to boost sustainability. As it happens with most things, if there is no regulation, things are moving slower. When there is a regulation and a policy, it is becoming a main driver. We can see this with regulations where there are already regulations on whole life carbon assessments for new buildings. Almost all Nordic countries have a regulation in place. In London, we've got the London plan that requires whole life carbon assessments, and this has become like a big driver for more LCAs and whole life carbon assessments and life cycle thinking in general in the industry. So if we have policies that promote refurbishment, then the industry will adapt and start thinking more about refurbishment as well. And the third one is to balance costs with environmental benefits. This relates to what we said just before with socioeconomic criteria. So we cannot expect refurbishment to be the case every time. I mean, if it's like too expensive, you name it, what means too expensive, that will be on the cities to define. Then we cannot expect the building owner to refurbish it, or if it is a very small site or things like that. So that would be my 3 takeaways.
Super. Anything Irene or our city representatives want to add to these takeaways before we move on to our questions from the audience?
Well, Adam in Lund, I can have some words. I think for us it's interesting because the carbon impact from our energy system is really low. So when we look at different renovation activities, sometimes it isn't even logical for us to change the old window. But then we also have to look at the energy availability, and the cost of not changing the window. So it's always a balance. So one logical answer could be very different in another country, depending on the carbon intensity and the energy availability, for example. So
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. I think this is the cue for us to take at least one or two questions from our audience, the moment we've been waiting for. So let's see, it looks like we have 3 questions at least. And the first one is, how do you as city officials get through to contractors and developers who operate on tight timelines and budget? Can you share some of your experience? Who would like to take this one first?
Well, maybe I can say something at the beginning. Well, of course, as a public sector representative, we need to have a bid every single time. So we have a design and all assessments already done when the contractor is giving the final price of the project. And we also have timelines. Yeah, they are usually quite tight. But I think that when we do good design and we have a good assessments done, then I don't think that it's a big problems. At least so far, we have been able to manage all those challenges here in Tampere.
Super. Thank you, Tanya. I think we could take the next question, and let's do like a very quick lightning round with some quick answers from everyone. Planned demolition requires qualified professionals. Given the current shortage of skilled labor in Europe, how do we factor this difficulty into the equation when evaluating different scenarios? Irene, can I point this to you first with a really quick comment, and then we can do a really quick round from everyone?
Yeah, I think here is critical as well to team up with the universities into the different training sectors to make sure that the learning curriculum is up to date, and that the policies and the pathway that the different governments are taking towards constructions are also reflecting into the skills and the training that we're giving in the different knowledge institutions. So those needs to be hand in hand.
Super. Wim?
Yeah, I agree with the answer of Irene. I think it's a real challenge for the coming years to foresee a lot of training, to foresee also specific diplomas actually on this aspects, because the amounts of and the number of renovations that we want to realize in our metropolitan area, it's not only on sites like what I showed Blanche-Maille, but it's also on individual houses. We have a lot of individual houses of the beginning of the 20th century, and that is not so performant on the carbon emissions. So the challenges are big, and I think indeed there are a lot of aspects that we need to put in place to have more specialized companies on this renovation aspects, and to foresee a lot of training indeed on these aspects.
Thanks, Wim. Let's take one more question and a very quick answer, whoever grabs it first. Where cities lack the power to enforce such policies, do you think they could be implemented at a national level by central governments?
I can take the quick. I think it could and it should, but we'll have to wait and see. I think it'll be necessary probably to get a big action in the entire nation. For us, we have weak local legislation, so we have to have a strong national legislation, I think. Otherwise, we also have to work with the voluntary action, so that's not really usually sufficient.
Thank you, Adam. And a huge thank you to all of our speakers. This session was an interesting one, and you should definitely read some more on the joint report and policy outline, which should now be shared again to the session chat. Before we end this session of the summit, I also want to highlight our academy, which has training programs that are delivered for free as part of our commitment to train 1 million low carbon experts by 2030. You can access hundreds of hours of on-demand course materials at One Click LCA Academy, or attend one of the live week-long boot camps for a comprehensive training on EPD and LCA concepts with our in-house experts. We actually also have a training produced together with CNCA for city officers, and you can access that through the QR code on the screen or by going to academy.oneclicklca.com. Next up on our Sustainability Summit, we have a session starting in almost exactly 1 hour. We'll be discussing with Low Carbon Building Initiative about committing European real estate to decarbonization. Please join us then in 1 hour. And finally, we are always super happy to hear from you. If you would like to contact us at One Click LCA, please visit oneclicklca.com. You're also welcome to follow us on LinkedIn, where we have more than 40,000 followers, or check out our new YouTube channel, which has a lot of rich content about decarbonizing the industry. A huge final thank you to all of our speakers today for a wonderful session. It was great having you all here.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
That is all for now, and see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you.